Hello and welcome to my first ever video for this flipped classroom. Now remember, when you watch this video, I expect you to take notes, come to class prepared so that when we do practice in class, you will actually know what's going on. Okay, so it's very important that you make notes. Now as we go along, I will help you on how to take good notes, but for now I want to see what you guys have. So feel free to pause this video whenever you want. Write down stuff you think you need to write down. Okay, so let's get started. This topic is called acid nomenclature. Now this word right here simply means this: rules for writing formula and names of acids. Because we're talking about acids, so it's acid nomenclature. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to write formulas and how to write names. Okay, so let's get started. Alright, now before we begin, we have to review polyatomic ions. I've told you guys like 1,000 times in class that these are very important because pretty much everything we do revolves around being able to write formulas or write names of chemicals. So understanding polyatomic ions is very, very important. Now, remember from class, we've talked this about base ions, that they end with 8. And then depending on the number of oxygen atoms, you will have different kinds of prefixes and suffixes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a base ion and as an example, and we're going to apply each of these criteria about how you change the number of oxygen atoms and then how do you name it. Okay, so let's practice some of that. So we're going to take an example of this ion whose formula is SO4 2 negative. Now if you take the time and look at the list of polyatomic ions that I gave you in class, you should be able to find this and you should be able to tell me that its name is sulfate. Okay, now notice what it ends with. It ends with 8. That should tell you that this is the base ion. So remember this: when you come across an ion, you need to either find the formula in the list or find the name in the list. One of these two things you should be able to do, and as long as you can do this, then the rest of the process is very simple. So let's go ahead and change this formula. If we change the number of oxygen atoms from 4 to 3, what you get instead is SO3. The oxidation number still stays the same, so it's SO3 2 negative. Now what did the chart tell us? It told us that you are going to replace the ATE, which is the suffix of the base ion, with ite. So sulfate becomes sulfite. Alright, next case, what if we take away 2 oxygen atoms? So now it becomes SO2 2 negative. What I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and I want you to write down the name and see if you get it right. Alright, so what you should have gotten is hyposulfite. Notice that here's your prefix hypo and then here's your suffix ite, which tells you that you have 2 less oxygen compared to the base ion. Similarly, if we add 1 extra oxygen atom, you get SO5 with the 2 negative charge. Let's do the same thing again. You're going to pause the video, you're going to write down the name and see if you get it right. Alright, so the name you should have gotten is persulfate. Again, if you go back to the chart, it will tell you that considering you have 1 extra oxygen compared to the base ion, you have to give it a prefix per and the suffix ate. Okay, so here's everything you need to know about how to name ions. Remember, if you know the name, okay, so if you know all of these names, then you should be able to write down these formulas, and vice versa. So if you know one, you should be able to figure out the other. Alright, so we're going to get started and figure out how to write a name if you know the formula of an acid, obviously. So the first thing you need to do is you're going to find the anion, okay? And the anion is very easy to get from the formula. All you need to do is kind of ignore the H, okay? And whatever's left, it would be your anion. So in this case, NO3 is your anion. Similarly, what is the anion in HBr? So again, if you scratch off the H, what you're left with is Br. But remember, Br is a nonmetal, which must mean that it has a negative charge. And because it's an element, you will look it up in the periodic table. And the periodic table will tell you that Br has one negative oxidation number. Alright, now once you've figured out the anion, you have to pay attention to the prefixes or the suffixes of the anion. So for example, if the anion you figured out has "ide" as its ending, then here's what you're going to do to the name of the acid. So you're going to put hydro as the prefix and "ic" as the suffix. So let's do an example, and let's take the example of hydrochloric acid. Alright, so hydrochloric acid. So if your formula is HCl, now you know that Cl is the anion, and Cl, if you look at the periodic table, is chloride. So it's CHLO RIDE. So it ends with "ide." Now, according to this information, "ide" needs to have a prefix hydro. So that's what you start the name with, hydro. And because it is chlorine, you take the root of the word chlor, and then you end it with "ic." So that you get the word hydrochloric. And of course it's an acid, so you need to write that at the end. So it's hydrochloric acid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another name, another formula, and you will try to write down the name by pausing the video, and I will tell you the name, but make sure that you pause and attempt this yourself first, okay? So the formula is HF. So go ahead and figure out the name. Remember that F is your anion, so you need to know what you will call this anion, and once you figure that out, then you will use that to figure out the name of this acid. Okay, so the answer you should have gotten is hydrofluoric acid. Hydro, because there's only one nonmetal, and fluoric, because it has to end with "ic", and then of course the word acid. Okay, so this is how you handle anions that end with the prefix "ide". Now the next example is that of an anion that ends with 8. So again, I'm going to write a formula, and our first job is going to isolate the anion from the hydrogen. Okay, so here's your formula. It's H2SO4. Remember what I told you. You have to single out the formula of the anion, which is everything except the H atoms, and what you end up with is SO4. Now, first thing you will do is you will take your list of polyatomic ions and you will find SO4. And once you do that, you will figure out that it is called sulfate. And once you figure that out, well, it ends with 8. And if the name of the anion ends with 8, then the name of the acid will be "ic". So here's what you will do. You will take the nonmetal, which is the nonmetal, not the oxygen part, but the other element, and you will take the root of the word. So S is sulfur, So sulfuric. See where I got the ic from? That tells me that this acid comes from an ion that ends with 8. And again, it's an acid, so you have to write it at the end. So H2SO4 is sulfuric acid. Let me give you another example, and I want you to figure it out. And of course, I'll tell you the answer at the end. So the formula is HNO3. Let me get you started. Remember that NO3 is your anion. So you're going to find NO3 in your list of polyatomic ions and proceed from there. Okay, so NO3 1 negative was nitrate, and you take the 8 prefix out and you replace it with ic, and what you get is nitric acid. Next example is that of an anion that ends with ite, and the name of the acid will end with us. So for example, if I give you the formula HNO2, the process stays the same. You identify the anion first, which is the NO2 part. Now, if you look this up in your list of polyatomic ions, you're not going to find it because it's not a base ion. It's NO2, which is one less oxygen atom than NO3. And so NO2 is nitrite. Okay, and so nitrite will turn into, you guessed it right, nitrous. And of course the word acid at the end. So remember, this is very important. As long as you can figure out the name of this polyatomic ion, then converting it to acid becomes very, very simple. So let's take another example of H2SO3. Figure out the name of this polyatomic ion. Once you do that, then you will be able to figure out the name of the acid. So go ahead and pause the video and figure it out. Alright, so the answer you should have gotten is sulfurous acid, because the base ion, not the base ion, but the anion in this formula was sulfite. Because SO4 is sulfate, and so SO3 becomes sulfite. For this next example, our acid is HNO. I think you should be getting a hang of what we're doing. We're isolating the anion. We're figuring out its name. So NO is 2 less oxygen atoms compared to NO3, which is nitrate. And so NO will be called, and I want you to pause the video and write down the answer. So you should have gotten hyponitrite, which is NO. And so since it has hypo and ite, then the name of the acid will be hypo and us. And so hyponitrite will turn into hyponitrous acid. So try to figure this out on your own. The formula I gave you is HClO. You will figure out what this is called, and once you figure that out, then you will figure out the name of the acid. So the anion is called hypochlorite, and because it has hypo and ite, then your acid will have hypo and us. So this is the third scenario. Let's move on to the fourth. The next example is that of HClO4. Go through the motions, you figure out the anion, you know that it has 1 extra oxygen compared to the base. ClO4 becomes perchlorate. So go ahead and take this opportunity to verify that you understand why this is called perchlorate. And if you don't, then make a note of this and make sure you come ask me in class, because again, cannot stress this enough, this is very important. So now that you know that it's called perchlorate, you notice that it has per and ate. And so you guessed it right, it's going to be per and then chloric followed by the word acid. Okay, so the process is really simple. Once you get the hang of it, you kind of start to see how these acids are named. Okay, you just have to make sure that you get all your prefixes and your suffixes right, and once you get that, it's pretty impossible to get these wrong. Okay, so let's take another example. We will take the example of H3PO5. So to get you started, you are going to figure out what this is called. Once you figure that out, you will use that to find the name of the acid. Okay, so this is called perphosphate, and you identify those prefixes and suffixes, and you will know that this acid is called perphosphoric acid, per and ic. So these are the different types of acids and their formulas you will encounter. As long as you know what to look for in the formula, you can easily convert that to the name of the acid. Now at this point, we have completed the first part of this lesson. So feel free to take a break. You can even watch this video tomorrow if you want, or whenever you get a chance, but I want you to finish this whole video before you come to class on Monday. Alright, so in this next section, we're going to learn how to write formulas. So obviously you have the name of the acid, and you have to figure out how to write its formula. So for example, I gave you hydrofluoric acid. Now, here's some of the things you need to check. Does the name start with hydro? Okay, this is the first thing you look for. Now, if your answer is yes, then it will have H and one other nonmetal, which is where the word binary comes from. Binary means 2. And so it will have H, so you know that it is going to have H. And the other nonmetal can be easily figured out if you just look at this, look at that part of the word, which is fluoric, which comes from the word fluorine, which is element F. And so these are your two elements in this binary acid. Now you know that H is 1 positive, and you know that F is 1 negative. Now, from what we've learned about writing formulas, you know that these cancel each other out, and what you end up with is HF. Remember, acids are ionic compounds, so you will use the same rules you learned to write formulas of ionic compounds for writing the formulas for acids. Okay, so hydrofluoric acid is HF. Similarly, if I give you another example, all right, another example is that of hydrosulfuric acid. Now, start with hydro, yes, and so you know it is going to have 2 elements. The first element is obviously going to be H. Because it is an acid, it must start with H. Now, what is the other element? You know that sulfuric sounds like the element sulfur, and so we're gonna go ahead and write the charges. H is 1 positive, and sulfur, because it belongs to group 6A, is 2 negative. And so what do you do then? You have 1 positive here. I hope this is ringing some bells in your head. And you have 1 more positive, and so the formula you get is, go ahead and pause, write down the answer. the answer I hope you got was H2S. Okay, so this is how you write formulas of binary acid, which is acids with only two elements. One of them is a hydrogen atom and one of them is any nonmetal. All right, so for these next few examples, I want you to first go pause this video and note down this chart in your notebook, okay? And you will then continuously refer back to this chart as we do some examples. Now, if you have copied down this chart, then I want you to pay attention to these suffixes and prefixes: ik, us, hypo and us, per and ik. Notice that you've already learned this. We learned this when we were trying to write the name of the compounds. Now we're going back. Now you're taking the suffixes of the acid and figuring out the name of the polyatomic ion, which is 8-ite, hypo and ite, and then per and ate. And once you figure out the name of the polyatomic ion, then you can figure out the formula. So let's go look at each of these acid names one by one and figure out how to write these formulas. All right, so the example we have in front of us is sulfuric acid. Okay, so now notice that it ends with ik and it has no prefix, so it's just sulfuric acid. Now you know it ends with ik, so if you look at the chart I asked you to make, then you should know that the polyatomic ion you need to find in the list needs to end with 8, okay, and it needs to have sulfur. Now there's only one such ion, which is sulfate. Now what is the formula for sulfate? Sulfate is SO4 2 negative, and now SO4 2 negative is combining with H, which is 1 positive, and so you have H, which is 1 positive, SO4, which is 2 negative. And so I'll let you pause the video, work this out while I do the same, and then let's compare our answers. So this is how your setup should look like. And the formula you should have gotten is H2SO4. Next example we're going to take is that of nitrous acid. So find the suffix, which is us in this case. Look in the chart that I asked you to make, and you will know that us wants you to use prefix ite, and so nitrous would give you nitrite, right? And so nitrite should be 1 less oxygen, and so it's NO2 1 negative combining with H positive, and that should give you, because they cancel each other out basically, so the formula you get is H NO2. Keep in mind that the hydrogen atom always comes in the beginning because it is positive. Positives always come first after negatives. This next example is that of perchloric acid. So you have a prefix per and you end with ik. So go back to the chart. It will tell you that perchloric comes from perchlorate. Okay, and perchlorate is ClO4 1 negative combining with H positive. Remember, it's H positive because it is an acid, and so in this case, just like the last one, you have 1 negative, 1 positive, and so the formula you should get is HClO4. And last but not least, hypobromous acid. And so here's your prefix hypo, here's your suffix us. Your chart should tell you that hypobromous came from hypobromite. Alright, and hypobromite has the formula BRO, 1 negative, which is going to combine with H positive, and the result would be the acid with the formula HBRO. Okay, so these are the 4 different ways in which you can write formulas from the names of acid. Now, here's what we've done in today's lesson. We have figured out how to write names if you know the formula, and we have figured out how to write formulas if you know the names. Please make sure that you watch this video and you take notes over everything, and remember that margin in the left side of your Cornell notes, that's where you're supposed to write down questions you have. Okay, so this is the first bit that we're going to practice. When you come back to me after enjoying your Thanksgiving break, I want you to come to class prepared with the notes. Okay, so please make sure that you go over this video. I apologize if it was a little longer. This is the first time I'm doing this, so please bear with me. It will get better with time. All right, so until then, have a fabulous Thanksgiving, and I hope you enjoy your break, and I'll see you on Monday.